Good afternoon, students. Today's topic of discussion is the glossopharyngeal nerve. You all know this glossopharyngeal nerve. It is the 11th cranial nerve, and the glossopharyngeal nerve, it is a mixed nerve. Mixed means it contains the sensory and the motor part. It emerges from the medulla oblongata, and it is the nerve of the third branchial arch. Then come to the next slide. Where is the glossopharyngeal nerve? So this picture is very much important. You find this glossopharyngeal nerve. In the midline, there is abduction nerve, then the facial nerve, and then the glossopharyngeal nerve. In between this upper part is of this medulla oblongata and this lower part of the pons in this pontomedullary junction. Okay. Then come to the component of this glossopharyngeal nerve. It is the mixed nerve, so it has some motor component and some sensory component. This somatic motor component, the somatic motor component for this stylopharyngeus muscle. The stylopharyngeus muscle, it comes from this third branchial arch, and this glossopharyngeal nerve, it is also the nerve of the third branchial arch. And this branchiomotor fiber supply the muscle arise from the upper part of the nucleus ambiguous. Then come to the general sensory part. The general sensation from the pharynx and the posterior one third of the tongue, soft palate, and the tonsil, it provides some sensory supply to this glossopharyngeal nerve. And the unipolar first sensory neuron, it provides the general somatic sensation. The sensations are the pain, touch, and temperature. Then come to the secretomotor fiber. The secretomotor fiber, it is the preganglionic secretomotor fiber, and it goes to the parotid gland. It is a parasympathetic in nature, and this preganglionic means there is one ganglion. From the nucleus, the fiber goes to the ganglion. This is the preganglionic, and some fibers which arise from the ganglion and goes to the gland. This is the postganglionic fiber. So the preganglionic fiber, which arises from the nucleus of this glossopharyngeal nerve, this inferior salivatory nucleus, it provides the origin of this secretomotor fiber, and from this inferior salivatory nucleus, the fiber goes to the tympanic branch of this glossopharyngeal nerve. Then it forms the tympanic plexus. From the tympanic plexus, the lesser superficial petrosal nerve, and then this nerve fiber goes to the otic ganglion, and the sensation is related here. And the postganglionic fiber from the otic ganglion run along the auriculotemporal nerve and ends in this parotid gland. Okay, and this pathway is very much important, and it should be asked, or it is very much important for examination. Then come to the special sense or taste sensation. The postsulcal part of the tongue and the palate papilla and soft palate, from this region, the special sense or taste sensation goes to the higher center. Then come to the general visual sensation from the carotid sinus and the carotid body. Then come to the next slide. This origin of this glossopharyngeal nucleus or glossopharyngeal nerve. At first, the nucleus ambiguous. The nucleus ambiguous, it is situated in the medulla, and it sends the fiber to the stylopharyngeus, branchiomotor fiber to the stylopharyngeus. Then nucleus of the spinal tract of the trigeminal nerve, it concerned with the general sensation. General sensation means the pain, touch, and temperature. And then the nucleus tractus solitarius, it is situated in the medulla oblongata on the ventrolateral aspect of the dorsal nucleus of the vagus. It receives the afferent fiber, taste fiber, from the 7th, 9th, and 10th cranial nerves from above downward. This nucleus tractus solitarius, it receives the taste sensation of the 7th, 9th, and 10th cranial nerve from above downward. And then the inferior salivary nucleus, it lies just above the junction of the medulla oblongata and the pons. It sends the secretomotor fiber to the parotid gland. And the pathway, you should remember, again I am telling the pathway. The secretomotor fiber coming from this inferior salivary nucleus it forms the tympanic branch. It has a tympanic branch. Then it forms the tympanic plexus. From the tympanic plexus, it goes to the lesser superficial petrosal nerve. Then otic ganglion. The sensation is read. The impulse is read here. Then to the postganglionic fiber run along the auriculotemporal nerve, and this fiber goes to the parotid gland. Then come to this slide. This is a schematic diagram. So this is the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, which is concerned with the general sensation. Then nucleus of the tractus solitarius for the taste sensation. This is the dorsal nucleus of the vagus, and it is the unit to detect the other nucleus where the nucleus is situated. Then come to this inferior salivary nucleus. Inferior salivary nucleus or salivatory nucleus. It goes to the parotid gland fibers, and the nucleus ambiguous. From this nucleus ambiguous, the branchiomotor fiber goes to the stylopharyngeus. Then come to the course of this glossopharyngeal nerve. The intraneural, then the superficial attachment at the brainstem, then intracranial course and exit from the cranium, and the extracranial course, which we discussed with these headings. Then come to the intraneural part. The intraneural part, it passes forward and laterally through the medulla. Previous slide, this nerve fiber, it provides laterally and forward. It goes laterally and forward, okay, through the medulla, and then come to the surface of this medulla. Then superficial attachment at the brainstem. The nerve comes out of the upper part of the groove between the olive and the inferior cerebellar peduncle, under cover of the flocculus of the cerebellum. Then come to the intracranial course. It lies on the jugular tubercle of the occipital bone, along with the vagus and the accessory nerve. Then exit from the cranium. This glossopharyngeal nerve, it exits the cranium through the middle compartment of the jugular foramen, through which passes the meningeal branch of the occipital and the ascending pharyngeal artery. The glossopharyngeal nerve lies in a separate sheath of the dura mater. Then come to the extracranial course. Just below jugular foramen, it is separated by inferior petrosal sinus from vagus and the accessory nerve, okay, and then it passes forward between the internal jugular vein and internal carotid artery. It descends in front of the artery and deep to the muscle attached to the styloid process. It now hooks round the stylopharyngeus and supply it, and then the nerve along with the stylopharyngeus passes between the internal and the external carotid artery. So the glossopharyngeal nerve in the neck, it lies in between the internal and the external carotid artery. Finally, the two enter the pharynx between the superior and the medial constrictor to be distributed to the mucous membrane of the pharynx, posterior one third of the tongue, soft palate, tonsil, and the mucous glands of the mouth. These are the pictures. After emerging, it goes to the tongue. So this is the superior ganglion and the inferior ganglion. The superior and the inferior ganglion. In this part, there are some unipolar neuron in this part, which provide this general somatic sensation. And for some carotid sinus, there are some general visceral sensation from the carotid sinus and the carotid body. Okay. Then come to the next slide, the ganglion. There are two ganglion. This is superior ganglion. It is situated in the nerve while coming out of the jugular foramen, and the inferior ganglion. It is situated on the inferior surface of the petrous part of the temporal bone. Its peripheral branches carry the taste and general sense from the posterior one-third of the tongue, including the palate papilla and also the general sense from the pharynx and soft palate. Then, so this is the superior ganglion and this is the inferior ganglion. Okay. Then come to the next slide, branches. At first, the tympanic branch, it enters the middle ear and become a part of the tympanic plexus. It enters the middle ear and joins with the corticotympanic nerves forming the tympanic plexus. Then the carotid branch to supply the carotid sinus and the carotid body. Carotid branch, you can find it here. Okay. This is the carotid branch. Okay. These are the tympanic branch, and this is the carotid branch. Then come to the pharyngeal branches. From pharyngeal plexus on middle constrictor with pharyngeal branch of vagus and laryngopharyngeal branch of the sympathetic trunk. The pharyngeal branches from a plexus, pharyngeal plexus, and the muscular branches to stylopharyngeus, and the tonsillar branch and the lingular branches to carry the taste and general sensation from the posterior third of the tongue, including the palate papilla. Again, come to the slide. This is the branch for the stylopharyngeus, and these are the branch for this tonsil and this tongue. Lingular branches, tonsillar branches. These are the muscular branches for branches of the carotid sinus and the tympanic branches. Okay. These are the relation of this glossopharyngeal nerve. It lies in between the external and the internal carotid and goes towards the tongue and enters this pharynx in between the superior and the middle constrictor. Okay. Then come to the applied anatomy. This glossopharyngeal nerve, it distributes the different parts of this oral cavity and the posterior one-third of the tongue and one muscle. So these things you should remember. The glossopharyngeal nerve is supplied the stylopharyngeal muscle. It provides the parasympathetic innervation to the parotid gland and the visceral sensation from parotid gland, carotid body sinus and pharynx middle ear, and taste from posterior one-third of the tongue, and this cuteness sensation from the external ear, common sensation from the posterior one-third of the tongue. So it is the distribution of this nerve. And one reflex known as the gag reflex. If you touch the posterior of the pharynx or the tonsillar area or the tongue, there may be gagging, and this gagging reflex is started by this glossopharyngeal nerve. The afferent fiber goes to the nucleus ambiguous, and from this nucleus ambiguous the efferent to the pharyngeal muscle. The efferent impulse come from the pharyngeal muscle by this glossopharyngeal and the vagus nerve. Gagging, what is gagging? The gagging is a retraction of the tongue and elevation and constriction of the pharyngeal muscle. So this gag reflex is related to this glossopharyngeal nerve, and the efferent fiber is related to the glossopharyngeal and the efferent fiber, it is related to this glossopharyngeal and the vagus nerve. Okay, and this is the palatal reflex. In case of palatal reflex, light touch of the short palate should lead to ipsilateral deviation of the uvula and elevation of the soft palate, swallowing reflex. And again, the efferent impulses goes to the nucleus ambiguous by this glossopharyngeal nerve, and efferent to palatal and the pharyngeal muscle by this vagus nerve. Okay, this is a palatal reflex. So these two reflexes are related to this glossopharyngeal nerve. So this part you should remember during examination, the secretomotor to the parotid gland. This part, secretomotor to the parotid gland. Again, I am telling you the tympanic nerve, the tympanic plexus, lesser petrosal, otic ganglion, auriculotemporal, and the parotid gland. And the tympanic branch carry all the parasympathetic fiber to this nerve. And the nucleus is the inferior salivatory nucleus. Thank you. This is all for this glossopharyngeal nerve. The next class will be this hypoglossal nerve. Okay.